Hello, it's Scott Manley here. It's Tuesday, July 8th. I'm finally back from my whole Arizona voyage for Asteroid Day, but it's time to talk about some deep space updates. And in the last couple of weeks, we've had 6 Starlink launches. 5 of those from Slick 40 on the East Coast. On the 23rd of June, there was 27 Starlinks, but also with a couple of Lemur satellites riding along. Also on 25th of June, 27th of June, 2nd of July, which was notable for being the 500th launch of a Falcon 9, and the booster number 1067 flew its 29th flight, making it the flight leader, or continuing for it to extend its lead. And then finally, in the last few hours, we had a launch on July 8th. On the West Coast, we had a Starlink launch on the 28th. Now, the main launch schedule, starting out, we have the 23rd of June, there was an Atlas V in the 551 Bruiser big-ass configuration. 27 Kuiper satellites out of Slick 41 on the East Coast. 23rd of June, there was also a Falcon 9 launching from Vandenberg, carried into sun-synchronous orbit. It was Transporter 14, carrying a whole bunch of payloads for a bunch of people. Notable, there was D-Orbit's Passionate Paula space tug and Charismatic Carlos. There was Mission Possible, the re-entry test vehicle for the exploration company. Varda's Winnebago re-entry vehicle. Overall, there was a lot of spacecraft from many countries, including USA, Canada, UK, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Slovenia, Greece, Turkey, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and Indonesia. 25th of June, Axiom 4, another SpaceX launch, Falcon 9, carrying their 4th private spaceflight to the International Space Station, commanded by former NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson. The paying passengers were Shubhanshu Shukla from India, Tibor Kapu from Hungary, and Slavoj Vindeshki from Poland. And yes, they, of course, spent the last couple of weeks in space doing their space experiments, talking with other people, inspiring people. We're now starting to look at when they might return. I believe the earliest return opportunity is this weekend. It will be on the West Coast, depending on what time. It could be an after dark re-entry which flies down the West Coast, and that would be amazing. But it could also be one that just comes out over the Pacific inland and we don't see anything. But we will be paying attention to that. And also, since the crew of Axiom 4 were the first crew to fly in this particular Dragon capsule, they got to pick the name. And the name they chose was Grace. And I know there was a bunch of detractors saying, this needs to be a real badass explorer type name. And I'm going to say, have you seen Grace Jones? She's got some pretty badass stuff going on. 26th of June, Rocket Lab, get the Hawk out of here. That was a launch into sun-synchronous orbit for Hawkeye 360 with their signals intelligence satellites. So this is Hawk 12 A, B, and C. They fly in formation in space together. And are also testing the new Kestrel 0A technology demonstrator hardware. It's like an 8U CubeSat, which is going to do some other tricks, and it also communicates via Iridium, enabling them to download data via when they're out of range of any of the ground stations that they normally use. Now, notably, this launch actually carried the spacecraft into sun-synchronous orbit rather than the other lower inclination orbits that Hawkeye have previously used, and this gives them full planetary coverage. And then on the 28th of June, less than 2 days later, in fact, it's 37 hours, Rocket Lab launched again from Mahia. So that is a rapid turnaround because there's 2 pads that are able to do this. The mission launched into a 650 kilometer sun-synchronous orbit and was called Symphony of the Stars. Now, they did not name the customer. They preferred to remain confidential, but they did make some comments about the naming being of Greek origin, and it didn't take space spotters long to figure out that this is almost certainly a Lyra satellite for EchoStar. So the satellite matches the one that's seen on the patch. Lyra is the Greek name for the constellation, which is the harp, which is part of a symphony orchestra. So yeah, this all makes sense. So we believe that's what this launch was all about. But yeah, congratulations to Rocket Lab for doing such a rapid turnaround. 20th of June, Japan launches an H-2A, and this is the final flight of Japan's venerable H-2 rocket. The spacecraft is the Global Observing Satellite for Greenhouse Gases and Water Cycle, or GOSAT-GW, also called Ibuki-GW. It's a Japanese Earth observation satellite for observing like global water cycle and greenhouse gases. It's a successor to previous satellites called GCOW and their GOSAT-2 satellites. So the H-2A, as I said, this is the final launch. Now everyone is onto the H-3. It, over its lifetime, achieved 49 successful launches, including a streak of 44 consecutive missions from 2003 till today. 1st of July, Falcon 9 launched carrying Meteosat 13 from Launch Complex 39A in Florida. So this is a European geostationary weather satellite. It's also known as MTG-S1 because it's Meteosat 3rd generation and because it's carrying a Sentinel-4A payload, which is an extra instrument that gets added to the Meteosat satellite. This is specifically to monitor air quality over Europe. So this will be sitting in a geostationary position where it can observe the European air. And it's kind of equivalent to Himawari or the US ones, but built by Europe. Now, interestingly, this mission was originally supposed to fly on Ariane 6, but it was moved to Falcon 9 to expedite the launch schedule given the problems that Ariane 6 has been experiencing. 3rd of July, out of China, we had a Long March 4C out of Xichang, which is, I believe that's pretty rare. I think the last time it flew from this site was 2018. But yeah, the satellite was Xi'an 28B01. Xi'an is basically China's secret test hardware satellite designation, whatever. Very little said about it beyond that it monitors the space environment, which could mean anything. And 3rd of July, we had a Soyuz launching Progress MS-31 out of Baikonur to the International Space Station, carrying a bunch of ferry, cargo stuff for a Russian segment of the ISS. Now, this was interesting because they had actually painted up the rocket to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Apollo-Soyuz test project, which launched back in 15th of July, 1975. That was, of course, when the USA and the Soviet Union got together in space, put their differences aside in the name of cooperation and science. And so, yeah, the spacecraft also has a bunch of commemorative items on board. I expect there will be some sort of ceremonies or whatever. But, wouldn't it be great to return to a time where the US and Russia were actually on better terms? That would, of course, require some other work on Russia's part first. Anyway, those are the launches. 29th of June, we also had a new Shepard 33, which is notable in its lack of notability. I looked at the Wikipedia page, and this is the first one I can see where none of the people on the list have Wikipedia pages right now. So they are just people that have made the money, they've had the dreams about going to space, and they spent the money. So good for them. We don't need to talk about them anymore. Okay, so rewinding, let's see what else happened in the last couple of weeks. Well, you saw my video on the SLS booster obsolescence life extension test, the booster test that failed out in Utah. So I haven't seen very much more from that. We've certainly looked at this a whole lot more, but look, at this point, it's for Artemis 8, and we don't even know for sure that Artemis 6 is going to be going. I did think it was interesting, by the way, that when I was in Arizona, Mary Robinette Cowell was there, and she was talking about her space stories, and I was talking about my asteroid stories, and she was like, here, have a patch, and it's the Artemis 8 patch for her, alternate history stories in the Lady Astronaut series. But yeah, Artemis 8, of course, is going to need these new boosters. Methane Sat, it failed in orbit. This was a satellite which was launched by a bunch of basically private donors, right? It's supposed to check and catalog industrial methane emissions, right? So, because methane is a very, very powerful greenhouse gas. Now, it's relatively short-lived compared to carbon dioxide, but, disappears out of the atmosphere more quickly than, say, water. And so just tracking that down, kind of, it's important for all sorts of reasons because it is a pollutant that we'd like to track. Anyway, it was launched on Transporter 10, operated by non-profit Environmental Defense Fund, which had, bunch of donors, I can't remember, like included Jeff Bezos and New Zealand Space Agency, Google. And anyway, so it's failed in orbit. It's somehow lost power. It's not likely to be recoverable. So yeah, satellite is unfortunately dead. DARPA sounds like, well, they've explained why they have decided to cancel the Draco mission, right? The Draco nuclear propulsion project. So Draco, we were hoping would be America putting the first nuclear thermal rocket into space. And now that may not happen. So NASA was a partner on this because it's interested in nuclear thermal propulsion. And DARPA was also interested in nuclear thermal propulsion. But as they've done the math in recent years, it's showed that sure, the technology would be groundbreaking for all sorts of interesting missions, just not the missions that DARPA is interested in right now. And those missions that they are interested in, the costs are coming down so quickly due to, SpaceX and other providers that it's unlikely that they would get the return on investment didn't look as rosy these days, beyond the absolute cool factor of having a nuclear reactor powering a rocket in space, which I think is a technology that still has many useful places. Now, as I said, NASA was also working on this with DARPA. I'm pretty sure they're going to cancel it because the budget request from the White House has zeroed out that, so they're not even going to launch it. And DARPA, they took their own decision to step back from it. So it looks like US nuclear propulsion efforts in space are dead right now. And that brings us to the BBB, the Big Beautiful Bill, which many people have said you have had criticisms of, let's say. And again, this just passed on July 3rd. It was signed on July 4th. This required a major lift. Like, a bunch of Republicans voted against it. All the Democrats voted against it. We had to have like the vice president come in and make the tie-break vote. Now, the most important things here, I guess, is that so first of all, this isn't the NASA bill that's, the regular appropriations bill that's going to like defund NASA. This is a more like a reconciliation bill, which is a fancy like procedural thing that allows you to do some things. You're allowed to tweak some numbers, but not other numbers. And it means you only need to get 50% of the votes or something like that. But anyway, this got pushed through. It does include $10 billion for human spaceflight mainly. I think there's a small part for like a satellite around Mars, a communication satellite that's part of the Mars sample return, but it's mostly like $2.6 billion to fund the Gateway, $4.1 billion for Artemis, right, for SLS and Artemis 4 and 5. Another billion or so for the space station, $1 billion for NASA space centers, which are all SLS related, no money for like the good places like Ames or Goddard or Langley. And it also, by the way, this bill gives Space Force $12 billion more, which pushes its budget to about $40 billion, much more than what NASA gets. But yeah, there's also one little thing in there that's had a lot of talk, and that is this paragraph or section added by Ted Cruz, who has been promoting the idea of Texas really deserves a space shuttle, right? Because 15 years ago, their applications to get a space shuttle may have sucked, but they deserve it because they were so involved. And look, there is an argument, yes, that Texas, Johnson Space Center and everything, were heavily involved in the shuttle program. But the truth was, when it came down to allocating space shuttles, the proposals by Texas were terrible. They were underfunded. There was almost no support. It was also taken for granted. And people have talked about this. And so the bill includes $85 million to bring a space vehicle that has carried humans from Washington to Texas. Now, this is clearly not enough money to do it because there's no way to do this affordably. First of all, the carrier aircraft are now mothballed and dead, right? So they've been sitting in museums. They're not flyable. You can't really get it on a barge. I don't know how you would do this. It would probably, realistically, it would involve cutting the thing up and then reassembling it on site. But yes, $85 million to investigate this. Now, to be clear, the language is written very vaguely, purposely vaguely, to avoid triggering the whole appropriations versus reconciliations rule. So it says a transportation of a space vehicle, right? So It doesn't specify which space vehicle, but it has to have carried people. So maybe there's something else. Maybe they could get a Dragon capsule. Now, another important budget-related story revolves around TRACS, the Traffic Coordination System for Space. And this is a commercial monitoring program to monitor all the commercial satellites and make sure that they're not going to interact with each other. Now, this is run by NOAA under their Space Commerce Department. And that department's budget is being cut by 85%. And that would be a problem because, of course, SpaceX, Amazon, everyone that's launching large numbers of satellites wants to make sure that this thing is actually coordinating the activity. Now, the funding is being pulled, claiming that SpaceX and everyone can do this on their own, but we've just had a letter from the industry saying, no, we can't do this on our own. It's signed by SpaceX, Amazon. Everyone that's a big player in this business are saying that this program needs to remain running. Now, if you're wondering why NOAA is handling satellite coordination, that's because back in 2020, the Trump administration instructed NOAA to take over that job from the Pentagon. Out in the Pacific, the Air Force has currently put on hold their plans to build rocket landing pads at Johnson Atoll, right, which is a small place about 700 miles away from Hawaii. And this was going to be part of the rocket cargo test program. Well, currently there's enough opposition that they've decided to put this on hold and look for other potential things. We're not sure whether they will continue at this location or find a new location, but that was just something that happened. Vera Rubin Telescope, of course, they had their big launch a couple of weeks ago, showing off some of their early data. Deep drilling, they were looking deep into the sky. But the telescope is now starting to go online and scan the sky. And we're starting to get the first data releases for partners coming in so that you can actually, so we'll actually start discovering stuff. And of course, one of the first things that happened straight after that, which was not related to Vera Rubin, was the discovery of Comet 3I Atlas, which I found fascinating. Yes, I talked about how Vera Rubin would enable this kind of thing. Well, we got one more discovery in before Vera Rubin got involved. So I have a video on this. There's a horrible mistake in it that was so embarrassing. But yes, this comet has a ridiculously high eccentricity. It is blazing through the solar system at 60 plus kilometers per second when you account for gravity. We know that it is a comet. We've now seen cometary coma around it, which means the size estimates for this are all over the place. If it was a dark asteroid, it could be bigger than 20 kilometers. But since there's a cloud of dust around it, that increases the reflectivity. So it's probably less than 5 kilometers in size right now. Also, somebody pointed out that it was discovered at almost exact opposition, which is interesting because there's a thing called the opposition effect, opposition surge, where the brightness of astronomical objects increases by like 40% when they're exactly illuminated behind. So literally the brightness shot up and we found this thing. Since then, we've found Arc, like pre-covery images going back to May, so we have a better idea of where it's going. It's going to fly close-ish by Mars and Jupiter, not close enough to be useful for any spacecraft there, but it's interesting that, slight change, we could get a really awesome show, except, of course, the Earth would be on the wrong side of the sun at that point. Okay, the European Space Agency, they have selected 5 contenders for their European Launcher Challenge. So they're basically looking for small satellite launchers from commercial organizations. The winners so far are ESAR Aerospace with their Spectrum rocket, Orbex with the Prime RFA-1, PLD's Miura rocket, and Maya Space's Maya rocket. So this was announced just yesterday, and they had 12 proposals. They've whittled it down to 5. There's going to be a couple of $100 million worth of cash to promote these activities, and we'll see if they actually turn these into a launch vehicle. Again, I'm looking forward to any of these things launching because it's great. It would be great to have some launches out of Europe. Now, a cool little science story that I found was Japanese scientists observing Venus using Himawari 8 and 9. Now, Himawari 8 and 9, these are geostationary Earth observation satellites that do weather. They have these amazing cameras designed to look through the clouds in 10 different frequency bands. Well, when you're pointed at the Earth and the satellite moves around, sometimes Venus appears right at the edge of the Earth. So they were able to isolate all those frames And in the few pixels they had, they were able to apply all their different filters and measure changes in the temperature of Venus's clouds over the last 10 years. So this gives them various depth profiles. And using this data, they can see things like thermal tides and planetary scale waves, which were measurable in this. This is an awesome bit of research because that data has just been sitting around. Literally, you can go and download. I had a screensaver that would download these images, right? So if you wanted to isolate them, figure out where they happened, you can actually do science on this. So that's a really cool little story. Another extraordinarily cool little story is this photo from Nicole Ayers of a sprite. And I think it's probably the best photo of a sprite. They have been working to try to capture this. Don Pettit has been talking about how to capture these things correctly using the correct camera settings and time lapse and everything. But you can very clearly see this shot of a storm over Texas and this like event shooting like high energy electrons up into the upper atmosphere. This is a phenomenon that's, of course, been happening throughout history. We just never really discovered it until the space age. And we never really got good photographs until recently with digital imagery that could just take lots of photos and throw away all the ones that didn't have the thing you were looking for. Yeah, this is an absolutely gorgeous image. Anyway, that's the end of my deep space updates for now, and now we're looking forward to the next few weeks. So Gilmore Space, I thought they would launch. They've again pushed their launch back. Maybe we'll see it launch, maybe not. They did have, though, by the way, have a satellite on the transporter mission. Axiom 4, they will be coming back. We'll be hoping that they use a descending return trajectory, like down the west coast rather than out over the Pacific, because I want to see it. It would look cool, and I think it would happen after dark, so I might even be able to get up and get some good photos of that. And if you're within driving distance of the San Francisco Bay Area, I will be at Open Sauce down in San Mateo. This is a weekend event. It's like a maker's fair on steroids with all sorts of cool celebrities, and I'll be no doubt having cool conversations with some of these people backstage, and I will definitely be coming out to the front and talking to as many people who want to take pictures and get me to sign things and whatever. Just, it'll be awesome. If I see you there, don't be afraid to say hi. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.